film tonight, I have a little bit of a cheat sheet because I want to make sure I hit on all the important points. And so I just wanted to make sure that I say our mission, because I know that some of us have heard it before, some of us may have not. So I just wanted to say that our mission is to promote and cultivate the appreciation, understanding, and stewardship of nature through education. And so this evening lecture series is just one of the programs that we do to educate Montanans about the environment. We do a lot of things in schools and out in the community as well. And then you can definitely find out a lot of information about our programs by checking out our magazines, and they're free and they're all over the place, so feel free to take one. And then we also have a great website. It's montananaturalist.org, and that's where you can find out about programs that are even more up-to-date information. And then, as you've probably noticed, we are being video recorded tonight, and this is the Missoula Community Access Television, and they're taping as part of their Media Assistant Grants program to nonprofit organizations. And that way it'll be aired publicly in a few weeks, and then we'll also have a DVD copy in our library for folks to check out. And if it seems like something interesting to folks, let me know, and we can try to do this for other lectures as well and have those available if you can't make it. All right? And then before I turn over the seats, I do want to recognize any folks here, staff members. So just give a little wave. You don't have to stand up or anything. So if people have questions, you know who to go to. So staff or board members, could you raise your hand, give a little wave? So if you have questions on memberships, which are very important to our organization, or just general questions, you can go to them. They're very knowledgeable. All right, and then now let me introduce our guest speaker. Now, when I was planning the fall calendar, I wanted to do a lecture on plants because animals get a lot of the show. So I talked about people with plants, and every time I did, basically Peter Lesica's name came up. And so I was like, well, this is the guy. So I gave him a call. No problem. It was very easy. He's very excited to come out and teach. And he has been doing botany and being an educator for years in the community and all around Montana. And so tonight, he's here to talk to us about a plant that we don't know necessarily too much about, even though we see it all over the place. So he's going to be talking to us about sagebrush. And now please help me welcome Peter Lesica.
Okay, I hope is this loud enough? Can people back there hear me? Okay, good. The natural history of sagebrush is probably a little bit overblown, but I thought this was the Natural History Center, so it was a good title. Just a couple days before Tina called me about doing this, I was out working with a graduate student at the university, and I mentioned that I said something to the effect that, oh, well, it depends on what kind of sagebrush. And he looked at me and he said, you mean there's more than one kind? And so I thought, well, that would be a good, there might be other people that are like that too, that think there's just, it's kind of like if you're a birder, it's kind of like seagull. Somebody says, oh, I saw a seagull. Well, what good is that? That doesn't tell you anything, hardly. And it's the same way with sagebrush. So I'm going to start off by talking about the different kinds of sagebrush, and I'm going to, enlighten you there, I'm sure. And then I'm going to go in and spend probably most of the time talking about why we should care, or so what. So that's kind of the outline of what I'm going to do here. So you can go ahead and hit the lights. Let's see. Okay, so there are 16 species of sagebrush sagebrush in Montana. But let me back up. I just noticed my note here. So the sage that you use to cook with, and the new riders of the purple sage and the riders of the purple sage, that is not sagebrush. That's sage, and that's a mint. And it doesn't look anything like those. It has nice blue flowers, and it's very attractive, and the flowers are very attractive. Sage is in the genus Artemisia. Sagebrush is in the genus Artemisia. And there are both herbaceous forms of it like this. So and there are also many woody ones. And I'm going to be focusing mainly on the woody ones. But you can see here the flowers are pretty, you can certainly see them, but they're not really showy. And in fact, I think are mostly wind pollinated. And they mostly bloom late in the year. So it's mostly like late August, September, something like that when sagebrushes bloom. Okay, but I am going to concentrate on the woody ones, and I'm just going to run through some of these just to amaze you about how many kinds of sagebrush there are. So this is bud sagebrush, and this is a plant of the deserts. And in Montana, it's only known from the desert around the Pryor Mountains south of Billings. But if you go down into Wyoming or Nevada, you'll see this quite a bit. It's just a little plant, just like this big, but it is woody, and it is in the genus Artemisia. Here's another one. Not all these slides by the way, are totally great, so you'll have to put up with that. But the thing to watch, I think, is over here. Watch this little outline of the leaf, and then see if you can see it in the photos. Let's see, maybe I'll use this. Okay, so this is birdfoot sagebrush, and this is also only found in the Pryor Mountain Desert south of Billings. It's a plant that otherwise goes on down into Wyoming and I think a little bit of Nebraska. It always grows in really heavy clay soils. And again, it's only about this tall. On the other hand, this is a fairly tall one. This one gets about waist high, longleaf sagebrush. And this one is actually more northeastern. So if you go up into the Missouri River breaks, you can see this. Or if you go up along the Canadian border, you can find this. It likes, just like the last one, it likes heavy soils, but it has very distinctive long linear leaves like that. Black sagebrush. This one, at least in Montana, I don't know about other places. This is one that's found in the mountains from Montana on south down into Nevada and California and probably Arizona as well. But in Montana, it's always on limestone-derived soils. So you can find this around Helena, around Townsend in particular, where there's a bunch of limestone. You can find it. This is those are the here. Those are the Meeteetse spires there. And if you just go over that hill, you'd be in Red Lodge. And if you just go back up this way, you'd be in the Beartooth. So this is the east front of the Beartooth, and you can see these spires are all limestone. And all this soil is derived from limestone, and so the black sagebrush really likes it there. Okay, here's one that's up on Mount Sentinel, up on Mount Jumbo, pretty much all over the place. It goes all the way out into Washington and goes all the way, I think, as far as Wisconsin, Minnesota, places like that. This is called fringed sagewort. And it's barely woody. It's just the very bottom that persists from year to year. But it is somewhat woody, and it's a really common one, and it's still, a friend of mine wants to get some seed of that, and I just gathered it a couple of days ago. So the seeds aren't really ready until November. So that's a real common one. This is one that I didn't have a very good picture of. This is three-tip sagebrush. And I took this picture because, like big sagebrush is the most common one. And we're going to talk mostly about big sagebrush tonight. But this in southwest Montana, and actually over around Ovando and even up into the Flathead, this will often grow with it. And what's interesting about this, or what's really different about it, is that big sagebrush is killed by fire. But you can see in this picture, this was taken right after a fire in Beaverhead County. It's coming right back up. So unlike big sagebrush, this one comes back right away after a fire. And because of that, if you have a high enough frequency of burning, you'll wind up changing the proportions. So you'll wind up having more and more three-tip sagebrush and less big sagebrush. Okay, here's a really, especially in northeastern Montana, this is really a big species. It's not really common around here, but as soon as you get east of the divide, you'll start to see silver sagebrush. Silver sagebrush is usually found on river terraces, stream terraces. I think I have a picture here. Yeah, so that's it there. So this is over by Malta. And there's a little bit of big sagebrush on the slopes, but as soon as you get down into this stream terrace, it's all silver sagebrush. And silver sagebrush is a little weedy, so it often grows on roadsides as well. And it also will come back after a fire. And when you get up into Canada, this is about the only kind of sagebrush they have. So when you get up into like Saskatchewan, they have different sagebrushes over in British Columbia. But when you get up into the north, into Canada on the Great Plains, the silver sagebrush becomes about the only one. Okay, but like I said, mostly tonight I'm going to talk about big sagebrush. That's the most common one. And big sagebrush has 3 common subspecies, and I'm going to talk about that. But first, like, you know, why should we care? Like, what difference does it make? And of course, to you guys who are mostly members of the Natural History Center, the reason that it's interesting that we have all these species is just because having a lot of species is cool, right? I mean, it's really cool that there are, you know, 18 species of sparrows and all of this stuff. So, I mean, I don't really need to explain that to you, but you know what? Even people that work for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks have to pay attention to this stuff. And so I'm going to tell you why. That was for Arnie. I'm not even sure he's here anymore, but oh, there he is. Okay. There are several species of animals. See, we got back to animals, as Tina was saying. You always wind up coming back to this. There are several species of animals that are dependent on sagebrush. And this is one that's hunted quite a bit and considered pretty important. And it's probably my favorite mammal in Montana. I just think they're not very smart, but they look cool. They look, when they're running and stuff, they're just great. But there are other ones. Are they cute or what? Aren't those adorable? So those are pygmy rabbits, and they are tied to sagebrush here in Montana and probably other places as well. And they're considered to be, you know, a species of concern by the Natural Heritage Program. But where are they from? They're found in sagebrush down in Beaverhead County. Yeah, and then on over into Idaho, I think. And, you know, I think they're mostly Great Basin. But, you know, I'm not an animal expert. You know, you got to ask somebody else about that stuff. You're going to have to speak. The sagebrush, no, it's mostly shelter, I think. Yeah, I don't think they eat it, but they seem to be really. Do they? Really? Okay. They're kind of short to make much, you know, get much out of. But anyhow, I don't know. I do know that that's right, isn't it, Christy? That they're sort of a Great Basin thing.
Yeah, they're Great Basin.
Okay. So of course they're really cute, but it doesn't look like an 800-pound gorilla, but this is the 800-pound gorilla. So this is the sage grouse, as I'm sure most of you know, and this is on the cusp of being listed as an endangered species. And Fish, Wildlife, and Parks just hates it when species get listed because it means they can no longer manage it. It's now being managed by the feds instead of by the state. So the state is really intent on trying to do everything they can to keep populations of the sage grouse high. And sage grouse is an obligate sagebrush species. So when I'm going to tell you about a little project that I did a few years ago, and at the time, and this may still be true now, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks was very insistent that sagebrush should not be burned intentionally. There should not be any controlled burns of sagebrush because you would just lose the habitat, and therefore it would, you know, possibly threaten the sage grouse habitat. On the other hand, The Forest Service was seeing stuff like this. So this is, again, down in southwest Montana on the Pioneer Range. And you can see that there's sagebrush, but what's happening is that Douglas fir and juniper are moving into it and are turning it slowly but surely into a woodland and then ultimately a forest. And so the Forest Service, and I mean, they're kind of into fire anyways, but they want to burn this stuff. So you've got Fish, Wildlife, and Parks saying, oh, we can't burn any sagebrush because it just doesn't come back and we'll lose the habitat and it's really a bad thing. And the Forest Service is saying, oh, come on, man, you know, we want to burn this because the sagebrush will come back right away and the trees won't and we'll have more sagebrush. And so there was this debate. But it turns out that actually nobody really knew what happened when you burned sagebrush. They didn't know when it came back. It was just sort of anecdotal. You talk to a guy from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and he'd say, oh, that stuff doesn't come back very quickly at all. And you talk to a Forest Service guy, and he'd tell you just the opposite. So anyhow, they hired a friend and I. Oh, yeah, before I go into that. So there's actually evidence that, I mean, if the Forest Service, well, actually, if Fish, Wildlife, and Parks is right, then you would expect that once you stopped fires, well, actually, if either of them are right, once you stopped burning, you would have more sagebrush. And so, there's a lot of evidence that, in fact, there were more fires historically than there are now. And I mean, we know that from, you know, living here in Missoula. Fire is a big deal with the fire lab. But there's evidence that, in fact, there was more sagebrush, or there was less sagebrush 100 years ago than there is now. So I've got a couple historical photos. This one is taken from, I think it's around Henry's Lake. It's somewhere around the Centennials. And that's the old photo. And there's the new one. And you can see there's a whole lot more sagebrush there now than there was 100 years ago or 90 years ago or whatever that one it is. This one is even better. Does anybody know where that is? That's a good guess. It's actually Boot Hill, right outside of Virginia City. So this is where they put the evildoers when they got done with them. So look at, you know, it's pretty bare back there, right? And there it is, I think, around 1980. A lot more sagebrush. So there's evidence, in fact, that you know, that there were more fires and that there's actually more sagebrush now than there used to be, which is what the Forest Service would probably say, but Fish, Wildlife, and Parks would have said no. Okay, so now first we're going to have a little primer on the subspecies of sagebrush. So this is basin big sagebrush, and again, I want you to watch the leaves. So look at this one. This leaf just tapers. You know, it's almost linear, real long taper. You can see that pretty well right here. Basin big sagebrush is not all that common in Montana. And especially, I'll talk about that in a minute, but it does get pretty big. It's the biggest one of the three that we're going to talk about, and that's Steve Cooper. That's the guy that I worked with on this project, and that's an old growth basin big sagebrush. He's standing under there. Basin big sagebrush occurs generally on the same sorts of sites that silver sagebrush occurs in further north. So this is an alluvial valley here, and all of that here is basin big sagebrush. Now up on the slopes here, it's not. That's probably Wyoming sagebrush. But down here in the bottoms, that's what it is. But you can't hardly find that anymore because most of that habitat like that has been turned into hayfields. And if it hasn't been turned into hayfields, it's been grazed to the point where it's in pretty tough shape. So that habitat, which was probably important habitat for sage grouse, I don't really know that, but I think that it used to be, probably was important winter habitat. I understand now that most of the sagebrush from southwest Montana go to Idaho in the winter. But anyhow, so that's basin big sagebrush there. Here's mountain big sagebrush. And in southwest Montana, where we did this study, this is the most common one. Now you can see again, the leaves now are not quite so linear. There's a little bit of a taper, you know, a little bit of a little change there. So it's starting to look a little bit like a bird's foot or a duck's foot, maybe. Let's see if I have a habitat picture here. Yeah. So that's what it looks like. It's growing up pretty high. It grows right up to the lower tree line there and covers a whole lot of territory in southwest Montana. Probably, well, certainly in southwest Montana, the most common one. That's it also. So that's the Pittlers back there. This is taken up if you cross from the Deer Lodge Valley over into the Big Hole. That's French Creek. Anyhow, so this is it here. This is the habitat where you would ordinarily find basin big sagebrush, but I think it's a little too high here. I think it's about 7,000 feet. Okay, and then we have Wyoming big sagebrush. And this one occurs both in southwest Montana and over in Idaho and Wyoming and all that, but it actually is the only subspecies that occurs in eastern Montana. And we'll look at that in a minute. But again, now look at the leaf. And this one occurs on the hottest, driest, toughest environment. So mountain big sagebrush actually grows in places where there's a fair amount of precipitation. And basin big sagebrush occurs where there's probably a little bit of overflow, you know, a little bit of runoff. So both of those species are in, you know, moderately moist habitats, at least, you know, by Montana standards. This one is the tough guy. This one occurs in really harsh habitats. Although I should mention that in general, sagebrush, you know, there's an old saying that I guess the pioneers said that wherever there was sagebrush, that's where you should plow and plant crops. Because big sagebrush doesn't really like gravelly, stony, sandy soil. It really likes deep, fairly rich soils. So even in the places where it occurs that are really dry, the soils are fairly deep. And I think if you just look around Missoula, you notice like there's no sagebrush on Jumbo or Sentinel because those hills are all just covered with gravel. Whereas if you go out to Big Flat in that area and look at the soils there, the soils are not that stony. They're actually kind of a little bit clay. And you can find sagebrush out there. Okay, so let's look at some habitat pictures. So here's one from southwest Montana. And it's a valley bottom, but it's just in a place where, you know, it's in a rain shadow and there's very little moisture. And then in eastern Montana, here's the Missouri River breaks. It occurs on those very clay soils. You know, they're not very good soils particularly, but they're deep. They're not stony. They're not sandy. They're not well drained. And then here's a picture from the Powder River country. And again, so it's up on a slope in some fairly decent soil. All right, let's see now. Okay, so here's what we did for this. I'm going to briefly describe what we did for the study. We went to the Forest Service, and they have all kinds of records of fires. And we got a whole bunch of them, a whole bunch of these records, and we randomly chose places where we could go and do a study like this. So see this? This is an obvious one, more obvious than some of them are, but that's a fire line right there. So the fire came over that ridge and came down here, and for one reason or another, it's possible that they put it out, but I doubt it. They usually don't spend a whole lot of money putting out sagebrush fires in the middle of nowhere. More likely the wind changed, or a storm came up, or something like that. But then what we would do is we would sample the vegetation out here, and we would sample the vegetation in here. And we knew the age of the fire from the Forest Service records. And we would also then age the sagebrush. Oops, there's a picture of our study sites, a map of our study sites. So you can see, so we're all, you know, pretty much around Dillon and Ennis, southwest Montana. And this is the sort of the study design. We would set up these lines. We'd find a place, you know, where there's a clear fire line, and we would set up lines on this side, and we would set up lines on this side, and we would measure, use these lines here to measure how much cover there was of sagebrush. And then we would randomly choose some sagebrush plants, and we would measure their height, and we would measure their age. And I brought a couple of those. We affectionately call them cookies. That show you that you know, you can look at the rings. So it's actually quite easy to age these plants. Got to cut them down, but I mean, you can do this even in the field with a little hand lens. Count the lenses and count the growth rings and determine the age. Okay, so what did we find out? So these are paired plots. So these are at the same site. I think I've always put the burned one on the right and the unburned one control plot on the left. So here, this is really obvious. Look at all that old wood laying on the ground. This is, you know, I'm guessing, you know, it's been 60 or 70 years since this was burned. But this one was burned 21 years. So this is a 21-year-old burn here, right next door to this, which hasn't been burned for many years. And the thing to notice is that the sagebrush is roughly the same height after just 21 years. So there's not a whole, except for all this stuff on the ground, there's actually not a whole lot of difference after just 21 years in this basin big sagebrush stand. All right, this is a mountain big sagebrush. And again, and this, let's see, this was after 8 years. So again, you can see that it's, you know, there's old dead plants, a lot of wood around, which is missing here. And the plants are shorter here, but this is after only 8 years. So after you know, a mere 8 years, this is sagebrush habitat again. So both mountain big sagebrush and basin big sagebrush, our study showed came back pretty quickly. And so here's, I can't give a talk without showing some graphs, so you'll just have to live with this. But what this is we plant, you know, so here's all of our 30, let's see, we had 28, I think it's 28 stands, paired plots. And on this axis, we're plotting, if it just burned, it's at 0% recovery. And if it's fully recovered, in other words, if it's indistinguishable from the unburned, then it's up here at 100. And you can see that as time goes on, it makes its way up to 100. And this line is really just the average of all of these. So it, you know, you would say on average, and this is mountain big sagebrush, subspecies Vassiana. On average, it takes about 32 years for it to fully recover after fire. So that's what we learned from this one. The basin big sagebrush, we didn't have enough stands. We only had 4 stands. But like I showed you, the basin big sagebrush recovers faster, and actually, based on those 4 comparisons we were able to do, I would say basin big sagebrush recovers even faster than mountain big sagebrush. Okay, this is the percent height recovery. And again, look at it, right up there around 33, 34. So not only does it recover the canopy cover, but it also recovers the height. So what this is saying is that the sagebrush on average, after 33, 34 years, is going to look just the same as if it had never burned.
What's what's the age of let's say, the fire, once it came back after a fire, they're all starting at the same point in time. How long does that stand? I'm not sure that's what you call it, but how long what's the natural life cycle of that particular stand?
You mean how long would it last if it didn't burn?
Yeah.
Well, what you'd wind up with is an uneven age stand. So you'd probably have, and that's, we could go back and look at some of those pictures, but you would probably have some 50-year-old plants. You might have a few 70-year-old plants, and you'd probably have some 40-year-old plants, and you'd probably have some 30-year-old, you'd just have a mixed age stand. Because they continue to come in. It's unlike lodgepole, where they're just lodgepole pine, everything's just one age. The sagebrush doesn't tend to be like that. Was that what you wanted to? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So one more of these for right now, and I just threw this in because one of the things, ranchers like to burn sagebrush too, and the reason they burn sagebrush is because it removes so the cows can get at the grass. Because if there's all these bushes out there, the cows don't want to stick their face in those bushes because they get their nose punched and stuff. So what actually happens is that the ranchers do this sometimes on their own, or at least they don't put them out. So and what this shows, so here's the percent grass change, and you see right after a fire, it's up here like 30%. So that means there's 30% more grass immediately after a fire, a couple of years after a fire. It takes the grass a year or two to come back too. But then it keeps going down and down, and by the age of, what do you know, about 32, the grass is back to where it was before there was a fire. So the whole thing, all of this evidence points to that on average, if you've got a mountain big sagebrush stand, you can expect it, when it burns, you can expect it to look pretty much back to the way it was after about 30 to 35 years.
So may I ask, what is the survival and recovery rate of the animals dependent on that?
I have no idea.
Here's most people's opinions.
Well, the animals are not burned up when this happens.
Sage is gone, so how can they survive for 8 years?
Well, they move to somewhere else. But of course, if a whole lot of the habitat is gone, then ultimately some of them don't breed and the population goes down. I have to say I question Fish, Wildlife, and Parks' idea that the only thing that's limiting here is how much sagebrush is on the landscape. I think there's probably some other stuff. There's probably some other things going on as well. But nonetheless, if you got rid of all the sagebrush, there wouldn't be a whole lot of habitat left.
Are there any species that move in after a fire?
You mean like woodpeckers in a forest? Yeah, I don't really know the cows. Actually elk. A lot of the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks used to burn. They actually used to burn the grass. So even where there isn't any sagebrush, like up on the front, they would burn the grass because that causes higher nutrient content in the grass, and it attracts the elk, and the elk do really well on that. So there's a lot of those kinds of preserves are actually managed with fire to provide elk habitat. But as far as I know, I don't know of any. Not that there aren't any, but I don't know of any species that are, that want that early burned habitat.
2 parts. Are there any plant fire followers that come in after the fire, and are any of those exotic or invasive species?
Okay, I heard the last part about invasive species.
Are there fire followers also? Are some plants stimulated to grow after the fire when they maybe haven't in 30 years?
You know, we didn't find that. We actually did look at that. I didn't bring that along because this was kind of about sagebrush, but we did one of the groups of plants that are very important for sage grouse. Remember, this study is driven by sage grouse. I mean, that's what, you know, this was funded by the Bureau of Land Management, and that's what they cared about, was the sage grouse. So we looked at the plants that are related to dandelions are apparently very important for brood, for raising brood. And so we actually counted all, and they're not just dandelions. There are a lot of native species that are in that same group. You know, they have milky juice and the puffy seeds and stuff. And we didn't find any changes. So most of the species, most of the native species are pretty well adapted to fire. And actually, we didn't find a whole lot of change in those species. The grasses were the ones that responded the most. Now, it is true that some of the annual grasses, non-native annual grasses like cheatgrass, will come in, will increase after fires. And that's a big problem that they've had in places like around Boise, around Lewiston, Idaho. We hardly had any stands that had cheatgrass. I mean, that's why I love working in this country, because there's not a whole lot of weeds, and it's pretty cool. And I don't know what the response of fire would be. I think it would depend on the season. I think it would depend on if there were rain at the right time and things like that.
So after a fire, how does a sagebrush stand regenerate? Is it from seed or from growth?
It's from seed. And it's interesting, sagebrush, so the whole genus, Artemisia, all of those don't have any real means of dispersal. So the sagebrush is in the aster family, you know, so goldenrods and balsam root and sunflowers and asters are all in that group. And most of those plants have little things on the seeds that help them float around or help them stick to animals, and sagebrush doesn't have any of that. So, you know, one of the things that people were concerned about was that, well, if there's a big burn, how is it going to recolonize? But apparently it has a seed bank or something like that, or at least these species do, because they do come back. And, you know, we aged those plants, and they don't come back immediately after the fire, but they usually come back within 5 or 6 years. You know, within 5 or 6 years, they have germinated and are starting to rejuvenate the stand. Yeah.
What do you mean by seed bank? So the seeds are already in the ground?
In the soil, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
And then one last question.
Yes.
What do the natives say? I mean, what, trying to put tribes, whatever, if they're burning that they did, what's the history on that and why?
Okay, I missed the first part of the question. Something about the indigenous species.
Peoples.
Oh, people.
Before cattle and whatnot, they burned on a regular.
Right.
Are there any stories down on that?
Well, I think that so I'm not a big expert on indigenous peoples' burning practices, but I think that they actually burned sometimes because they were using some of the plants, but also because it attracted game.
And the buffalo, they were.
Yeah, because any animals, grasses that have been burned and have just, you know, when you burn, you release a bunch of nutrients. It's kind of like throwing fertilizer out there. And so what happens is the grass that's coming up after a burn is more nutritious. So it's kind of like the difference between, you know, cornflakes and frosted flakes. It's kind of like that.
That's why they mostly burn the.
Yeah, I think that very often they burn to attract animals that then they preyed on.
Animals are easy to hunt.
Yeah, maybe not when you're using a spear.
I hear stories that if you just crawl up with the skin on you, they come up to see what you are.
Yeah. Well, they're not very bright, but I've never had them do that to me. I mean, you know, they'll stare at you for a long time and make, you know, little grunting noises and stuff and go all around you, but I've never had them walk up to me.
But were you crawling around with the skin on you?
I was crawling around.
Dangerous thing to do during hunting season, I'd say.
Yeah. Okay. But as you recall, we only talked about 2 of the subspecies. So this is the other one. This is Wyomingensis. And this is a burn in southwest Montana, and it's 23 years old. So after 23 years, it still looks like that. There's virtually no sagebrush. And
So you're telling us the subspecies. What's the species? What's the genus and species?
this is Artemisia tridentata, subspecies. They've all been tried. I switched to tridentata exclusively about 15 minutes ago, Ann. Okay, so this is Tridentata wyomingensis, Wyoming sagebrush, Wyoming big sagebrush. And in southwest Montana, it's not coming back. And so we didn't, we only had, what, five, we actually had more than that. I'm a little surprised there aren't some other dots there. And probably this, we're trying to fit a straight line to it here. And probably the real line goes something like this. But anyways, I mean, that's 20% recovery there. So it's not even making 5% recovery. We don't expect it to make more than 5% recovery after 50 years. So our research shows that this kind of sagebrush in southwest Montana does not recover after fire. Okay, so then I helped design this plan, but I did not go out there and collect the data. Cooper went out there and collected the data. But you can see he sampled, so there's Billings, he sampled up here kind of around the Missouri River and a bunch of stuff down here in the Powder River country. And there's what he found, and that is a 41-year-old burn. And again, it's the same story. Just in eastern Montana, the same way it was in southwestern Montana. That's Wyoming. Yeah, that's the only one that occurs in eastern Montana. The only subspecies of big sagebrush. You have lots of silver sagebrush as well, but that's the biggie there. And so here's what he found. Pretty much the same thing, except you can see he's got a lot more stands there, because that's all he had to sample, was Wyoming. Again, you can expect 20% recovery after 80 years. So Wyoming big sagebrush acts real differently. So if you were like that graduate student over at the university and you didn't realize that there were 3 subspecies of big sagebrush and you just sampled one of them, you could get the wrong impression. So it's really, this study showed that it was really important to know which subspecies you were dealing with. Because if you start going out to eastern Montana and purposefully burning sagebrush, it's not going to come back very quickly. It also suggests that because we have been putting out range fires and because we've built all these roads that act as fire breaks, that probably there wasn't as much sagebrush 100 years ago as there is today.
It depends.
Fish, Wildlife, and Parks.
Yeah, but you just said that the settlers said sagebrush was the place to go plow.
Yeah,
So
that's
anything
true.
that was flat and deep soil.
Yeah, no, that's true, and I am thinking more of, oh, come on, go one more, there we go. I'm actually thinking about this country.
Yeah, that rugged. That's
Right, but up here in the Fertile Triangle, it's probably true. It's probably true. But anyways, and that's really speculation. You'd have to actually do some studies to make sure that was really true. But it does indicate that at least down here where there hasn't been a lot of agriculture, where it's still mostly rangeland, that there probably was less sagebrush then than there is now. And it makes, there's some debate about whether we should be, should we be managing for pre-settlement conditions? You know, should that be our benchmark? Should we say, well, okay, if there was only 10% or 20% cover of sagebrush back in, you know, back at the turn of the last century, is that what we should, you know, is that what we want? But I think that, you know, that's what all of those organisms have evolved with. I mean, that's the way it was then. And if we want to, you know, maybe if we want to manage for just for sage grouse, then maybe we want the whole landscape covered with sagebrush. But there are probably other things that want non-sagebrush. And, you know, if we cover the whole landscape with sagebrush, then those things are going to become endangered, and they're going to go on the endangered species list, and we're just going to have the same problem over again. So I think, in general, managing for pre-settlement conditions makes sense if you want to maintain everything that we still have. Okay. So, boy, I put this in for some reason. I can tell you what it is. This is a picture from, I think that's the Snowcrest Range back there. And so this is southwest Montana, and this is basin big sagebrush down in the bottom. Oh, I know, I was going to reiterate the point. And here's mountain big sagebrush up here. So there's two kinds of sagebrush here, and probably, maybe, down here, it's Wyoming sagebrush. So here on the landscape, we may have 3 different kinds, and so, you know, fire is gonna do different things in those different habitats. And, you know, I would say that this is probably a good one to leave alone, even though it comes back quickly because we have so little of it. And the Wyoming is one that maybe we don't want to burn either, just because there's not that much of it and it won't come back very quickly. But that, you know, here, the mountain big sagebrush is probably not a big deal because there's a lot of it and it comes back pretty quickly. But it just depends on your management goals. Anyhow, so that was, you know, that was something that I think probably helped a lot of managers think about what they want to do in terms of controlled burning and putting out wildfires. And, you know, shows the value of understanding what kind of sagebrush that is out there. So that's all I have. Thanks for listening. So, any questions?
Yes, is there a difference in the distribution of sagebrush between the 3 big sagebrush?
The distribution in the sense of what, global? You mean like what states it occurs in, or?
Are the sage grouse preferring the mountain or the base?
I think, okay, so actually, Christy could probably answer this better than I can. My understanding is that they move around. And in fact, in some of the, you know, in some of the summer, you can find them, they're not in sagebrush at all. They're out in sort of moist meadows, wet to moist meadows. My understanding is that they like the bigger stands of sagebrush in the winter because of the cover. And probably they like dense stands of sagebrush when they're on the nest. So they need a mosaic of the stuff. They'll use any of them. In fact, like I said, up in Canada, they use silver sagebrush, so it's not even big sagebrush. And you know, there's probably some variation too in what's going on. I mean, they don't in eastern Montana. They don't have 3 subspecies of big sagebrush. They just have 1, and they're doing okay out there. You know, I mean, Montana has some of the healthier populations in the world.
One other question, at a rest stop down in Wyoming, there was an informational sign about mama sage, talking about the critical relationship between sage and the wildlife. Mm-hmm. And my recollection is they said there were 30 species of sage in Wyoming.
Yeah, I bet Wyoming has more than Montana. Yeah, it's probably true, although just like the newspaper, you gotta be a little skeptical. But yeah, I think that there's certainly, like I said, I think, we have 22 species, but we also have I guess I didn't write it down. We also, a lot of them have subspecies like big sagebrush, so that they're, you know, in terms of different entities, there's more than that in Montana as well, and maybe they were counting those.
And this may not be a fair question, but I'm wondering what the relationship, what's the basis of the dependency of the antelope on sage?
They eat it in the winter. In fact, I think that's why you don't want to kill them in the spring, because they taste like sagebrush. But then in the summer, they have a more varied diet. I don't eat meat, so I don't really know about these things. I'm just kind of, this is what I heard.
You're doing pretty good.
Thanks, Kirsty.
Yeah, in terms of antelope, they can actually live in some places where there isn't sagebrush to eat in the winter, but those are generally places like the Rocky Mountain front where there's a lot of wind-swept bare slopes and they can get other things to eat. But in a lot of the eastern Montana, the snow cover is very deep. It can be very deep in the wintertime, and then the only thing they have is the sagebrush that's sticking up above the snow. So it's a pretty important winter food in many places for mule deer as well. And I'm not really as much of a game expert either, and I've only worked in eastern Montana around sage grouse where there's just Wyoming big sage, but I know for pygmy rabbits, they like the older growth sagebrush there, and I don't recall if they have a preference for some species, but that fire could obviously affect them. But with any of this, it really is what's out there on the landscape, because sage grouse can even tolerate a certain level of agriculture in their home ranges, but it's just, again, the degree, how much is too much, and that's some of the landscape ecology questions that people are still trying to get at with some of these species. How much conversion to agricultural crops or to grassland or to cheatgrass or whatever can these species tolerate? You know, oil fields, that kind of thing. So it's a complex story, more complex than just do you burn it or not, and it gets to the landscape level for looking at these is really where a lot of the solutions and problems are, but we just have to be able to understand that better than we do now for many of these species.
Bob?
But to give some perspective, my dad grew up in frontier Wyoming, and his father loved to hunt sage grouse and he raised English setters. And they would go out, this is the mid-30s, and frontier is down southwestern Wyoming near Cameron, a big sagebrush country, high as 7,000 feet. The sage grouse season was the month of September. The limit was 15 a day. And my dad would go out with his dad and they would shoot 30 birds every evening for the month of September. They had these huge flocks of sage grouse, and the people canned them and ate them. That was a harvested situation. But can you imagine being able to go out and, you know, getting up these big flocks? I mean, I've hunted them down the Bighorn once for 2 days, and I found 2 skunks on one of the McDowell ranches that was reputed to be a great sage grouse habitat. So there's been a huge change in what's gone on in the sagebrush country, and it's had a very direct impact.
Yeah. Well, I think, as I think Christy alluded to, a lot of the oil and gas stuff going on in Wyoming has probably had some pretty significant effects on that. And there may be disease issues as well. Okay, I think he had his hand up before, so yeah.
2 questions. Back to so the cooking sage that we use in our cooking, that's not a true sage at all?
Well, now wait, if you were in the mint family, you would say that is the true sage. So generally what you want to do is you want to call that stuff sage. So parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, that sage is a mint, and that is sage. And these are sage brushes.
Is that salvia?
Salvia is right, is sage.
And the second question is, just so I have it straight, the Wyoming sage, that's normally the tough guy, as you call it,
Yeah, it's usually the smallest one.
but it's the most sensitive to fire.
Yeah. Yeah.
In Lockwood, up by Ovando,
Uh-huh.
a lot of sage up in there on those moraine hills.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that I understood you correctly. I thought you said that it mostly grew in good soils or clay soils, not in rubbly, rocky stuff, so.
Yeah, usually not. Usually not. Now, you know, there's actually 3-tip sagebrush up there, but there's a lot of, but moraine is not, you know, like if you walk up on Jumbo and Sentinel, I mean, or for example, if you try to dig a hole in my backyard in the lower Rattlesnake, you will be working at it for a long time because it's just nothing but cobbles and rocks and stuff. And I don't, you know, my experience with the Ovando Valley is that there's a lot of pretty decent soil there. So if you go out there and you stick a shovel in, it's not going to go clink. You know, you'll actually hit dirt. It's not true, huh, Bob?
Well, it'll go clink 1 out of 3 times. But we have a lot of sagebrush around our place.
Right.
This
Yeah.
isn't that knobby.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. No, I know what you mean, but I don't think it's as.
Not as bad as I think.
It's not. Yeah. It's probably not as bad as you think. But you know, I think that when the pioneers made that statement, they were actually referring to basin big sagebrush, which occurs on very deep, really good alluvial soils, which is where the hayfields are now. But it is also true, like I said, I mean, you know, why isn't there any sagebrush on Jumbo and Sentinel? It's the soil. It's not, you know, it's perfectly, the climate's no different than it is out there on Mullen Road.
Is it true, Peter, that overwatering will kill sage? Or
Wow.
diminish its capacity?
God, has anybody ever done that?
I've heard that story in the
We have
context
in
of
the backyard.
the flood irrigating and the big hole. There's actually been an expansion of some of the wild areas by virtue of.
I think if you just, you know, I mean, the way they irrigate in the big hole, I mean, they just really, it's definitely flood irrigating. And I think if you did that, you probably would kill lots of stuff. You know, you'd wind up with just a bunch of sedges, which is a lot of what they have down there now. Christy?
So in the Great Basin, we lived in Utah for 3 years and heard a lot about this, but it seemed like that the cheatgrass infestations were increasing the fire frequency. So it wasn't so much the fact that sagebrush burned, but it was the frequency by which it was burning.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the cheatgrass, don't you end up with fire frequencies of just 3 or 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, I've actually just recently tried looking into that, and I haven't come up with the data. But that's pretty much what everybody says is that, you know, that cheatgrass produces a more fuel and a flashier fuel, and it you know, so it's easier for lightning to cause a fire and that sort of thing.
Because I know they were a little concerned about sagebrush down in there, and I just assume is that Great Basin? Which subspecies of big sagebrush?
It actually could be. It's most likely basin big sagebrush. Yeah, and I mean I wouldn't try extrapolating these results to Utah actually, but they have mountain big sagebrush. You know, if you go up into the hills of the LaSalle Mountains or some of that's, you know, it's going to be mountain big sagebrush. But I think a lot of that country in Wyoming, you know, with those deeper soils, Wyoming and Nevada and places like that, it's probably basin big sagebrush.
And the other curiosity question I had is after these burn, for the subspecies that come back, how old do the shrubs have to be before they produce seeds again? Because that's where fire frequency could eventually eliminate your seed source in the soil.
Oh yeah.
Unless they produce seeds after just a couple of years.
Yeah, I don't think they do, but I don't really know the answer to that, but I don't think they produce them after a couple of years. Yeah, no, the fire frequency, if you went up to like even a 15-year fire frequency in mountain big sagebrush, you'd get rid of it. Yeah.
What policy changes, if any, did you see implemented as a result of your research?
I can't say that I know of any. I think that the eastern Montana stuff, I think, is raising a lot of eyebrows because I guess people thought that sagebrush came back faster than that, and also because, you know, it seems like the sage grouse advocates believe that there's less sagebrush in those areas than there used to be. And, you know, certainly where there's agriculture, that would be true. So, you know, the two big, in eastern Montana, the two big areas for sage grouse are up in that Malta country and then down in the Powder River country, you know, that area, Tongue River, Powder River, southeast. And, you know, it's a different story there. So there isn't a lot of agriculture. And a lot of people are still, you know, you still see land managers saying, well, we need more sagebrush, whereas other people are saying, well, wait a second. There probably wasn't all that much sagebrush here anyways because the fire, it doesn't come back after fire, and there certainly was lots of fire. So, but in terms of, you know, and actually I don't pay attention too much to what the agencies are thinking about and doing, except when, you know, when they hire me to do something like this. So I don't know if there have been any changes or not. I know the Forest Service still wants to burn because of that encroachment, that woody encroachment and the sagebrush. And our study kind of supports that that's a reasonable thing to do if it's mountain big sagebrush. Yeah. Well, okay, I don't really know the answer to that, and it probably differs depending on where you are in the country. But I don't think we ever found one more than 70 years old in Montana. So, you know, that one that Cooper was standing under might have been older, but I'll be damned if I'm going to cut that one down. Anything else? Yeah.
And the root distribution, what's a typical of a sagebrush, like a big basin sagebrush? What sort of a root system does it have, and does this affect the interval between plants?
Well, I do think that they spread out. To be honest with you, I have never dug them up. I dug up a lot of tamarisk in my life, and that was enough. Yeah, I know that they can get that they can have fairly deep roots, but I also think that they do spread out a ways. So that's a pretty wishy-washy answer to your question. Yeah, I don't really know the answer to that. In general, with trees, you can expect the feeder roots to be out underneath the edges of the crown, the drip line. And so that may be a reasonable rule for sagebrush as well, but I don't honestly know. I do know that they get deep though. Anything else? Okay, well, thanks a lot.